thing, but in the meantime, I will get you a link. There's a little bit of setup there. So if you're more comfortable just using the existing editor, then you can stick with that. But the nice thing about this is you can put it on your own computer and you don't need to, connect to a web server. It's still web-based. It still runs in a browser, but you just connect to your local computer.
Could you send in the chat
yeah, I'm just digging it up.
Yes, thank you.
View it on GitHub. It moved
Danny,
recently.
can I jump in here for a second?
For sure.
You're talking about the mechanics of editing the problem. I think that's the least kind of important part. I think the most important part is to have a tutorial, which I think Andrew has a couple of lovely video tutorials. Unfortunately, I didn't record their links, but they should be out there somewhere.
Yes.
I mean, that's a lovely interface, but I think the interface is less important than the actual understanding of the source code.
Yes, and this is something that we've been working on and started working on and are talking about doing more of, is cleaning up the, for lack of a better word, documentation on how to write problems. I mean, I hate to call it documentation because what people are really looking for is tutorials and not as much, just a manual. So this is something that we're hoping to get a lot of work done on this summer, is cleaning up the website and organizing things so that when you first land on the WeBWorK homepage, the main things people look for are easy to find. Like, how do I write a problem? How do I get access to WeBWorK? And because right now it's a bit of a mess, as is the wiki, which has a lot of information. And I mean, I'm like everyone else. I come to these meetings and I find out things that I didn't know about WeBWorK. So inevitably you come here, and this is part of the reason we wanted to do these, is people can come in with general or specific questions, and it's another way for us to knowledge share, because I'm sure each of us has done various cool things with the platform. So just knowing where to go and what you can do. But yeah, I'll throw in a plug for people who are interested in helping to write or organize this documentation.
Yep.
This is another thing that's been a barrier, is not having the man hours and the resources to go through.
Testing 1, 2.
Hey,
Testing
we can hear you now.
There we go. Yay.
Testing 1. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2.
Stephen, we can hear you. Stephen, we can hear you.
So now is it that he can't hear us?
Possibly.
Great.
Can't have it both ways.
If I could just add to what Danny was saying, yes, we're working on getting the documentation ducks in a row. We have Victor Sorelson from BMCC and City Tech. He is one of our WeBWorK fellows over at CUNY, and he has been actively kind of curating the video tutorials, looking through the best of the best. And I just spoke with him yesterday, and he's making headway. I gave him access, again, just yesterday, I gave him access to the YouTube channel that I put the link in the chat. If you go to our website, there's a link to WeBWorK tutorials on that page. And so you can see the playlists that we have in there. In there, Ivan, you'll find the problem authoring session that Andrew did, and then you'll find like the tea times with Daniel Garbin, and so you'll find some resources there, but just keep your eye on it, because we will be posting more playlists with an eye towards how do you author problems, how do you do weekly maintenance of, whatever it may be, the week to week, whatever it may be, resources out there, we're going to organize them and they're going to be populated on that channel. And then, like what Danny was saying, the overarching organization of our web presence, this is a whole other project, which we're hoping to tackle this summer. At the most recent exec board meeting, we were talking through if we hold kind of code camps similar to what we've done in the past, what would those code camps focus on? And, you know, one of them that Danny brought up, which I agree with him wholeheartedly, is that we've got to organize our web presence. We've got to streamline it so people can get at the information that they need to use WeBWorK and author problems, navigate the OPL, and so on. And the other two code camps will be OPL related, because we do need to do an OPL reorg. It needs to be easier to share content. And then we have, you know, a boatload of content sitting in Contrib, which needs to be vetted and pushed to the OPL. So we have a lot of OPL related projects we've got to get through. So, you know, 2 of the 3 code camps we're hoping will focus on OPL and content sharing, and 1 will be focused on getting our act together in terms of web presence and what the community wants from our web presence, like what would be the most helpful. So that's kind of what's coming up in the summer. And if anybody here would like to participate in that, we're happy to hear it. We're happy to have volunteers. We're going to be reaching out to those of you who have expressed interest to kind of help out with these projects as we go. We're hoping that we can have some kind of funding. So, you know, we can maybe provide stipends. Again, we don't know what the funding situation is going to look like, but we're working on it. So we're hoping there'll be some kind of incentive for you guys to participate. And now I'm going to shut up because I know that we have questions. So Stephen, are you able to hear us, and are you able to communicate with us?
I want to actually return to Ivan's question. Mariana here probably overwhelmed you with her answer because there's a lot of information there. I think your question was much simpler. It was to, how do I begin to code? And you know, just to remind everyone, it's actually a super important moment because we discovered that you have to rephrase questions, for otherwise they Google them continuously. They're all over the place. And basically my instructors this term are rewording our own problem just to change the wording, not to change the problem, but to change the wording so that Google doesn't find it instantly. And that seems to be actually working. You basically edit until Googling the text of what you've created doesn't come up with any responses. It's not particularly difficult, but it is time consuming. And at that level, Ivan, I think it's actually not difficult. What you do is you need to understand the overall structure of the problem. What's the header? What's an answer checker? What's the text of the problem? And a lot of prototypes out there, they have a lot of descriptions in the comments, which actually makes it very long and difficult to read. But once you've written your first short problem, it shouldn't be a very difficult step to write the next 10. It's the first one that is tricky. And I think, I swear, I saw a very good intro video, and I think it was Andrew's, but I don't know where it is. I don't know if it's on the YouTube channel that we have, but I think this is the one that should be highlighted.
Thank you, Edward, for that information. I thank you also, Danny, for what you sent out in the chat. I grab it, I copy and paste into my notes. And definitely, yeah, taking a problem that is already posted in the OPL or in these other free libraries, right, help, because then you change it and then you repose, and then it's a new problem, basically, right? And what Edward mentioned also, it's extremely important for me. We need to make sure that the problems that we post are not easily done by Wolfram Alpha or Mathway or all this software that is out there, right? So, for instance, I have found in the OPL and in other sources around there in WeBWorK, there are some problems that they use like applets that the students have to kind of play around with in order to answer questions. And those, I think, is very difficult for them to get it done through Wolfram Alpha or any other software, because they deal with concept, like they have to move, drag points around, moves lines around, and then until they really, unless they understand what they have to do, they will not get it, you know. And then it's something that, so, but for that, again, I need to go into the coding. Now, one question for Mariana. you mentioned OPL, right? Open Public Library. I think this is what it is, right? But I noticed that there are other sources around there too. The OPL comes by default as the primary source where we should look for content, right? For questions and stuff. But there are other sources around where I have found also interesting problems, and I pick them up from there. I change them a little bit, and then I post them. So the other sources, are they also safe or as good as the OPL, the other sources that are around?
So just kind of a little bit of history is that what happened was when the NSF funding first came in, and this is, you know, John Jones educated me. He was working with Mike Gage and Arnie Pizer and, you know, the rest of kind of the foundational team of WeBWorK 25 years ago. They got initial NSF funding. And what it was, when they wrote WeBWorK problems, there was an initial repository which just accepted everything. Anyone who authored anything, who pushed it to the repository, it was accepted and it was there. Then problems started to emerge where some of the WeBWorK problems had bugs in them, some were better than others. And so, you know, they had to devise a way to kind of vet the problems before they went into this repository. And so then a couple years later, Contrib was created. So you'll see Contrib and you'll see the OPL. And so for years, NSF funding was there to, you know, get these code camps together so that people would get together, do a few days of work, vet the problems from Contrib, and then if they were good enough, they followed best practices, they were tagged appropriately, they had no bugs in them, they've been utilized, so on and so forth, it met the criteria, then they were pushed from Contrib to the OPL. And so those are the two kind of repositories that you'll see. You may see, depending on the way your WeBWorK server is set up, you may see other ways to search. So for instance, Andrew Parker set up for us on our dev server, he set up a few different buttons. We have problems directly from College of Idaho. We use a lot of them for our stats. So from Robin Cruz, she kind of gave us a lot of her problems. And so Andrew Parker created on our library browser window a button that says, you know, College of Idaho, and we click there and we can search through there. So I'm not sure if you're referencing that or if maybe you're looking through the GitHub to pull up the problems that you're talking about. So are you talking about problems that are outside Contrib and outside the OPL, those problems? Where are you finding these problems?
Yeah, when I go to, I think it's browse, the tab in WeBWorK is browse, right? Browse library or something like that. Immediately pops up the OPL, right? By default. I'm a BMCC, but now
yep.
I see if I choose other sources, they give you like 3 more sources to look from.
Yep.
Then
yep.
two or three more sources appear, and there are like a bunch of folders where if they say calculus 1, calculus and linear algebra, pre-calculus, right?
So that's your private content. Yep, that's not in Contrib or the OPL. That's your private content for BMCC. I know Oleg is working on a lot of stuff for you guys. Oleg and Stephen Featherstone Howe, Oleg musician and Stephen Featherstone Howe. They're working with us and they're also creating a lot of private content that wasn't pushed to Contrib, and Andrew Parker helped them get it in, some of it into Contrib. But so if you're looking through, you know, your own browser window on your own server, it may be that what's popping up is you're searching through your own private content.
But I know what you're saying, right? That preloaded stuff. That's something that I know. But I'm talking about when you go to browse tab, and then I can show you if you let me share.
Yeah, please do. Please do share with us. Show us what you're seeing. Here, let me do this. Okay, you should be able to share.
Okay. Let's go to. Let's say. Let's sign into this one. By the way, you mentioned that you guys at City Tech has they have some preloaded stuff, right? But I would like to have access to that too. But I am at BMCC. I don't know how.
Absolutely, we'll give it to you. We have a dev server where we have representatives from multiple different CUNY campuses have accounts in there. Oleg and Stephen are 2 of them. We have other faculty from all over CUNY in there as well. So we'd be happy to give you an account so you have access to those things. But we try our best to encourage people to put their private content into Contrib if they want to share with each other. I do know that some people are reluctant because they want it to be perfect before they put it out into the world. And I completely understand that. But we want to kind of lower the barrier to entry. And that's kind of what we're working on this summer to make it easier to share.
Okay, Maria. So you can see here that this is my own stuff, right?
Yep.
The preloaded thing, for some reason, this semester didn't appear. So it's just all these homeworks are mine, right? So now what I'm talking about is this, right? This button here, this library browser, right? If we click in that library browser, by default, I have this one, right? Let's say I want to look for it. This is the OPL, right?
Correct.
I look for something, let's say calculus, single variable, and then I go by chapters, right? Well organized and nice, right? Yeah, this is one of the sources that I use to pick up problems from, right? But however, besides that, you see here local problems. From this course, this is the ones that you were saying, right? That my college brings up. But this one, for example, local problems. When I click in there and I go view problems, I should have selected this. I think local problems viewer. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about, Mariana. Look,
that's Contrib. See the directory Contrib. Yep.
Contrib.
You can tell by looking at the root directory where it's coming from. If it's library, it says library, otherwise Contrib. Yep.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. Yeah, so this is all Contrib, right? And then there's good stuff in there. I have found good problems.
Such good stuff. That's what I was saying. Like, we need to get our acts together and like go through it so that it can be pushed to the library. The thing is, what's in Contrib may not be tagged properly. We don't know if it's been used in a course. Like, the thing is that we joke, we say it's kind of like the Wild West, right, Danny?
Yeah, that's absolutely true, because some problems I had to tweak them around a little bit and test it first myself. And then some of them also, I think they were made without considering that, but the math quill was already active, right? They asked, for example, if the answer is infinity, they asked the students to type the word infinity, which no longer is needed because we now have the math quill, right? The math quill that Andrew taught us about. So I use math quill. My students love it because it's just a whole headache that moves away from us, because they are no longer asking about how do I type infinity minus infinity. And it's very friendly, it becomes very friendly, right? But this one, I think the math quill is active for the, the only way is to know it is how it posts, right? But it's a good source, however, right? So you see there are problems there.
Absolutely.
And then I have found also problems that they use applets, which I love a lot, because they kind of force the student to think, right? How to move points around, how to.
So if you want examples, so Ivan, I would definitely follow Edward's advice and Danny's advice, where what you want to do is, get a problem that you like, look through the code of it, and just start to get familiar with, you're kind of, you have your tagging on the top, like look at the structure of the problem and start to understand the pieces. You have, you're declaring variables and so on and so forth, right? Same thing when I was learning LaTeX as well. Like, I would just tell someone, give me a LaTeX file. Let me see what your quiz looks like. And then you start piecing together. You look and say, oh, I understand. This means this means, and you work off of templates. And again, I very rarely ever start from scratch, right? I always pull up a LaTeX file that I used before and I start from there. I never ever author anything from scratch in LaTeX as well. So you're going to work with some files that you like, pick them apart, look at the problem authoring. Edward, we do have that nice problem authoring session that you mentioned. It was Andrew Parker, and you can get to it by clicking on the WeBWorK tutorials and that page I shared with you. You can find it through there. I would recommend you watch it. Regarding the wording of the problems to avoid the problem solvers, Daniel, and I don't know if you were able to join us, but Daniel and Andrew gave a really great talk, kind of picking that apart of what the mechanics of that may look like, lower level and higher level. So you want to watch the Tea Time #2 talks about that to avoid the problem solvers. So that's kind of where you want to begin. And if you want any, if you want access to the CUNY dev server, I'm happy to create the account for you. And this way you can get in there. Danny, do you have anything to add? I'm sorry, Ivan.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, not really. I mean, other than the other thing that maybe, I don't know if this is the right time to chat about, is what would make solving searching for problems easier is one of the things that we're trying to get feedback on, because Mariana mentioned that one of the projects for this summer is reworking how the OPL is structured to make it easier to find things and easier to contribute things. So, I mean, we've already mentioned a couple of things. One that's come up a couple times is, can this just be plugged into Wolfram Alpha?
Yeah.
You know, because that's a flag that you could at least filter out 90% of the WeBWorK problems, because you know that they're too easy to just, you know, use whatever app you like to solve. And I mean, not to say that the ones that are left couldn't be done, but at least you'd be narrowing it down to the ones that are more challenging to cheat on.
Yeah, in that sense, I think, Mariana, I watched the recording of T2, I think was a meeting, where Danny showed how, for example, if you present a problem in a scaffolded form, right? Such that the students have to go from step one, and only when they finish with step one, they go to step two, and then step three, right? Step four, he was showing a problem about completing squares, I think, right? But not just a final answer is required, but instead, the student has to fill up all the previous steps. So I use that too, that idea. So I try to pick up problems that are scaffolded. So it's a very good way to handle it. And also, as I said, I use applet problems that have applets. But also, I think we have to kind of start rating which questions are good, right? Again, which questions doesn't lead to students just taking a picture of the question and sending it through Madway or typing it out in Wolfram Alpha. And you guys should know that Wolfram Alpha is it uses artificial intelligence, I think, right? You just have to type the question in any way. You don't have to even type it mathematically. You can say, what is the integral of this in words? And it will pick up, because that's artificial intelligence. It's very, very important to kind of come up with questions that are not so easy to answer with those tools, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned rating, and this has come up many times.
Yeah.
You're not the only one to have asked for this, but I always struggle with what sort of rating would be meaningful to this, because there is already it's based on Bloom's taxonomy, but there's a 1 to 6 rating on every problem in the OPL that I don't know if that even shows when you search, which is just supposed to be sort of, you know, what level of skill, of cognitive skill, does it take to solve this? But
it sounds very subjective. So, in what level of cognitive skill? Yeah, kind of.
yeah, well, and I mean,
but
I'm going to post the link to again, this is something that John Jones developed when he was working on the OPL, but you know, he's got this 1 to 6, and that's the definitions in that link I just sent. Again, there's more than one aspect for rating, right? There's just plain difficulty. You know, do students get this problem right or wrong? And then there's also, is it just, I mean, related to what we were trying to do with these problem levels, is it just plug it into a formula, or is it something that you have to think about in order to solve, that you can't just, you know, I know that I see this, I plug in this formula and I get the answer. So, I mean, that's, again, what sort of rating is meaningful, and what does a rating mean? You know, if we give a scale of 1 to 5, does 5 just mean hard, meaning that most students don't get it right? And is that because it's poorly worded or it's tricky, versus because it's an actual conceptual question? So these are some of the things that we're wanting input on. And I mean, whatever we do won't be perfect. There is no, if there was a great 1 to 5 system, we'd have it by now, if there was a system that was universally good. So, you know, this is, and it might be more than one aspect. There might be a pure difficulty one. There might be just, does it use this type of skill? So if you guys have thoughts on, you know, what sort of box you would like to check in the library browser to see certain types of problems.
And Danny, you know, Agnes and I were talking with Jennifer of Douglas College. And, we also talked to Daria Kim of City Tech. She's with the physics faculty. And we had a great discussion, and a lot of great ideas came out of that discussion. So Agnes, maybe you can kind of summarize what we were talking about at our meeting.
I'm not sure what specifically we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we did. We talked about a lot of things.
Yeah, I think we're kind of working in our own minds on problem level, and we talked about the difference between the challenge of the problem versus the length of time. You could do a very lengthy problem with many procedures, and it would be a rather low level problem in terms of the skills needed. Yeah, is that what you meant, Mariana, or were there other comments?
Yeah, there was that comment we had talked through. And then another thing that Daria brought up, because she's a novice WeBWorK user, she's just starting this semester for the first time to use it. And she had really good insight. She was like, what about just doing a string search? She was like, why can't I just type in a string search? And then she was saying to Agnes, she was telling you, Agnes, it would be very helpful at the very beginning if you write physics and then, whatever in the problem path. And, these kinds of suggestions are helpful, like to someone kind of who's not so much in the weeds as maybe we are, who's like a user for the first time, saying, these are the things that would help me, navigate as I go. So I thought that was quite an interesting conversation we had with Daria.
Yeah, and I think another thing is I know there are ways to link sections of the taxonomy within different taxonomies, but, like having a first year physics taxonomy that's a bit more general, that covers kind of OpenStax, and then have those physics topics split out further, because that's kind of common. Like you do a more general course in physics, and then you're doing more specialized courses, and we could link those together. That'd be useful for finding stuff. So you could target what the type of course that you are trying to build questions for, build homework sets for.
Not to tout our own horn here, but we did that in the the first year physics data set for OpenStax that we put up.
Oh yes, we've enjoyed looking at those, and they're actually being used in my colleague Jennifer's course this term.
We are revamping the structure of the file structure a little bit, and by summer we'll have an updated version, hopefully. But there's a problem. For example, UBC contributed a lovely mechanics of something or other of continuous media course. And their taxonomy begins at a different level. There is no top level physics, just there isn't a top level math. And that's okay, I can live with that. It just means that the top level browser is a little bit long. But
yeah, and that's what, yeah.
Orient ourselves in it. But the problem I see it is that until the problem is in the OPL, library browser does not access the keywords.
Yeah.
And that's a serious fault. And to me, we will never agree, all of us worldwide, we will never agree on one taxonomy, and it'll be defective in one way or another. I think the keyword search is far more important at this stage. And I think we should encourage authors to populate the keyword metadata. And we should enable some sort of keyword search that covers not just the OPL, but covers contrib, covers local directories or local problem sets.
From what we've seen with the keywords that exist, I can't find problems looking for the keywords that are in those problems in the OPL.
I don't mean one to the
that's a
exclusion
known
of the
issue.
other.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean is that we may need to do both.
Well, so I mean, let me give you a couple of comments on history, and then my dream, my vision of how this would look in the future. One is that, I mean, it was decided early on that this was going to be a taxonomy, which means that everything fits into one classification. And as you say, Edward, I mean, we all know that we're not going to agree on that. But one of the biggest problems in the early days of the OPL was that everyone was tagging things however they thought, they should. And the one thing that we spent a ton of man hours, and I know George was involved with this, so he's been through many hours of this as well, was just making them consistent. So, chain rule with a capital C, or L'Hôpital's rule with or without the apostrophe, with or without the accent on the O, and just putting these all into one category. And even, some of them were just called calculus and others were called calculus single variable. So at least now all of the chain rule problems are in one place. So that was the idea behind a taxonomy. I agree too with the keyword thing. And we started building this is at U of C, we started building an exam bank of just our written exam LaTeX questions. And we decided to go more the keyword direction, but with sort of an approved list of keywords. And here's where I'm getting into sort of my dream for this, is that if you find something that doesn't fit into the taxonomy, and I mean, Agnes goes through this on a regular basis because they're always adding new content that doesn't already exist in WeBWorK, there should be some mechanism for you to propose additions to the taxonomy where at least that gets looked at by a second person. I'm not necessarily saying that there's some authority that approves this, but at least a couple of other people look at this to double check that it makes sense outside of your university, and that it makes sense and that you haven't missed something that's already in the taxonomy. And then this is the other thing that's been lacking, is an interface in WeBWorK to help you tag your problems and declare what they go with. So if the interface in WeBWorK allowed you to pick keywords, and another dream I have is like an autocomplete or a suggested autocomplete. So you start typing chain rule, or you start typing, mechanics of fluids, and it fills that in with the actual proper spelled one that already exists in the OPL, then that makes your life a whole lot easier. And I also agree. I mean, with the mechanism for getting stuff that is submitted, I don't even want to say in contrib, because that might be changing in the next year or so if we get the resources to do this. Stuff that's submitted by individuals should then go for review, and that process should be sort of automatic. And instead of hiding stuff that isn't, instead of a yes, no, either this is accepted or it's not accepted, you should be told sort of what the community's status is of this problem. Either it hasn't been reviewed, it's been reviewed and, quote unquote accepted, whatever that means, or it's been reviewed and, rejected, or, that there were concerns about it. And this is another thing that, I mean, one of the easy ones, maybe, is adding the contrib stuff to the library browser, but having you click a button that says, show me everything, rather than just show me the approved problems. The challenge with that is that we accept things into contrib. Everything is accepted into contrib is the short version. There's no vetting to get into contrib. So there's no guarantee that it's tagged or tagged properly. So, I mean, the other discussion was that with the keywords, I agree that that's a much better way to go, because like when I think of my introductory calculus course, there are times where on an assignment, I want a chain rule problem, or a quotient rule problem that doesn't use chain rule and doesn't use exponential functions, but does use trig functions. So this is where I like keywords, because I can say, show me problems that have the keyword derivative, the keyword chain rule, but not the keyword, trigonometry or exponentials or things like that. And there's a few challenges. One, someone has to build this, and the other one is we then have to go through whatever problems we've accepted and get them so they have the right tags. And ideally, what I'd like to see is this built into WeBWorK, where you use a problem and it pops up the tags and it says, hey, if you don't agree with those, click here. And it sends it off to the mothership, wherever that is, saying, this needs review. And I mean, the other thing we have to do then is we have to get a big community of people that are willing to look at these things and say, yep, I agree with that. Let's change that. Or no. And it has to be sort of a one-click thing so that people that only have 5 or 10 minutes here or there can just go through a few problems at a time.
It's you're raising a whole bunch of issues here. One is the organizational issue, and people have been trying to solve these things, these workflow issues, all over the world in different ways. It would be lovely to have a central authority, however ill or well defined it is, that is doing nothing but vetting and cleaning and pruning and keeping this thing structured. But I fear it's going to go the way of the Yahoo. It's going to, we have to do a Google approach. We have to have an automation to that of some sort. There's no way we're going to have an editorial structure to it. So the other aspect is the searching and differences in convention. Somehow, a lot of search engines from, I'm an amateur genealogist, so I like Stephen Moore's has an interesting scheme where, as names evolve through times, letters get substituted, and he has this search engine essentially that allows you to trace a name even though the actual spelling is nowhere near. And that's because he has like a historical mapping of which characters may be well substituted for others. Something like that, something that isn't terribly sensitive to the way you spell your L'Hopital's rule, would probably be helpful. So that's just a question of taking the right search engine and incorporating a keyword search engine or topic search engine incorporated into WeBWorK there. But somehow we don't have currently kind of a voting system where, and I know I pick up a problem, I look at it, I edit it, and I say, oh yeah, that's a good one. And there's nowhere for me to say back, yeah, that's a good one. And maybe over time, as my opinions agree with others, I pick up a reputation. And so my positive vote for a problem counts more than somebody who's just come in and haven't thought about other things. And so in this way, a ranking to the problem, a rating to the problem might emerge. But that's a huge structural rewrite. And it would be lovely, but I'm at a loss as to where to begin, because it would have to be deeply integrated into WeBWorK.
Yeah, and all of these things count on us having someone who's willing to do the coding and or the resources to hire someone to do this. And again, I agree, and this is where I don't want there to be a small editorial board, because it's been challenging. It's been overwhelming for a group that small to try and manage all of these problems. So I am looking more towards what you describe, where feedback comes from the community. And again, we'd have to figure out some general guidelines on, do we wait for 3 people to complain about this problem before it gets flagged as something that needs to be reviewed? But even the tweaks and the fixes, that's horribly inefficient, and it's pretty much George's entire career right now is fixing bugs that people report. But if I find a problem or a typo, what inevitably happens now is we fix it locally, and then it's too much work to try and submit it back. So this is something that if we build this interactivity between a local WeBWorK server and some central system that maintains the OPL, then we can do things like make it one click. This is a bug fix, I'd like to submit this. And then it goes for review. And if someone you know, if two people agree that this is a correct bug fix, then it just gets rolled in. But also that feedback on, you know, this is a good problem, or, you know, adding keywords, adding textbook tags is another one, right? Because we all use different textbooks or different other resources, and there is a very clunky mechanism right now to associate a WeBWorK problem with a textbook, you know, chapter and section for a specific text. So, you know, if you're using OpenStax or you're using some other textbook, paid or free, for your course, it would be good to know which problems you found that align nicely with that textbook. And this is something where, again, with the resources, we could easily build this into the interface, where when you start your course, you say, I'm using this textbook. And then you create your assignment and you say, this assignment is on chapter 3, section 2. And then all those problems get linked to that. So again, I'm sort of brainstorming and dreaming here, because all of this is doable with the resources.
And if I could add that we definitely have talked about pulling together some new funding proposals, you know, obviously collaborative ones where we can get some of the funding to support some engineering updates that'll make it easier to support an OPL reorg, you know, add a rating system, get a better way to search, and these kinds of things, you know, have course offerings as opposed to just on the problem level. We're going to fold all of this in. And so this summer will be kind of the summer of grant writing, I think, so that we can make some progress, hopefully, crossing fingers. That's the goal. And I want to just sneak in. So I just want to let you know, I'm going to pass off hosting maybe to Danny, if you're able to stay beyond 3 p.m. I'll pass hosting off to you. I've got to hop off because we have Paul Seeberger from LibreText is going to be giving us a workshop on how to get started creating a LibreText and how to embed WeBWorK problems into it. All of you are welcome to join. I could even give you the invite for that if you want to hop over with me, but that's starting at 3 o'clock. But I want to make sure that I hear from Stephen. I've never met you before, so I'm so glad. And you know, from my memory, you're a physical chemist. Is that correct?
That's correct. I just want to make sure that
Yeah.
my audio is working. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right. Yeah, I appreciate your patience on that as well.
Of course.
And so, yeah, so my where I came in on this is I've been using WeBWorks for a couple of years now for physical chemistry, building first a skeletal level of questions for my course, and then we have one course here that we teach at Fitchburg State, and then flushing that out as the years has been going by, and it's been working well. I have a background in coding, and so Perl didn't scare me, but in any case, well, I had the idea that I could begin to incorporate this in my general chemistry course as well. The obvious spot would be for just the straight up general chemistry problems, and I see that there's actually problems in the library for that. But that what I was really intrigued by was the thought of putting it into the lab. I personally feel, and other instructors feel, that the lab is not delivering the level of instruction that it could. Students tend to borrow lab reports from previous years. A lot of it is redundant. So what I wanted to do was to take in the student data, this would be a fairly substantial now assignment, but it would, the first part would take in the student data, and then the students would then solve the problems with their own data. And that's where I started poking around on it for a little bit, and found a couple ways that look theoretically possible that WeBWorK could incorporate data in the forums. And then Mariana, you directed me to Tani, who over the course of this last week then independently followed up with me and sent me one of his problems where it wasn't that exact thing, but he was able to demonstrate to me of how you could use, essentially what I want to do is use the multi-answer function, and then be able to retain a variable from that function into subsequent problems. And so it would leave the scope of that problem and then eventually build it using the scaffold to have the different sections in the manual. So this is a long-winded way of saying I don't have any questions. I just greatly appreciate the invitation and enjoyed hearing.
Well, we're so happy to have you, Stephen, and I'm so glad that Agnes joined as well. Agnes, you're mechanical engineering, is that correct? She may have stepped away. Or you're muted, Agnes. Oh, there you are.
No, sorry, my internet had a hiccup there. I didn't realize you were talking to me. Sorry, could you repeat what the question
I was
was?
saying that I'm so glad that Stephen joined, and I was glad that you were here because you're mechanical engineering.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Yeah, and Agnes and I had talked, and at last conversation, we were just kind of talking through that we really want to create kind of a network of engineers, physicists, chemists. We want to really broaden. It's been mainly mathematician based, for these past decades, but we recognize the promise of building WeBWorK content for cross-disciplinary purposes, and we really do think that we need to kind of have voices. Yes, Tim, please.
That fits in well with my question. So I teach a lot of statistics and like machine learning and stuff. So like, I mean, that's another audience you could capture, right? So what I'd like to be able to do, so I'd like some template problems of how to integrate R into the use of R in the problem, right? And my ideal would be like a given problem would have, say, sort of a master file of like 1,000 records or something like that. And then every student would get a random sample of records, say 100 records from that master file. And then there would be like a link or something that they would download that file, analyze it in Excel or R or whatever, and then answer the questions. So like that's sort of my dream, but I don't know how to do it in WeBWorK. And if anyone knows how, I would love to know. And I think that could really help you expand your audience, because I think statistics would be really ripe for that. And it's pretty close to math. I mean, so.
Yeah.
Tim, sorry.
Go ahead, Agnes.
Do you know about the R integration developed at UBC?
I know that it exists, but I need like template problems or something to get me started.
So I know there's a whole bunch of stats problems in Contrib. And so if you go Contrib UBC stat, SASTAT, they've got a bunch of problems. And one of the people who helped develop those is now at another university locally. I could put you in contact if you're interested.
Okay, so are like all these going to have R? Like I was given some R problems, but they didn't actually use R. They would just say like, tell the student type these numbers into R and get the answer. But like that's not what I'm looking for.
Yeah, those came from me, from Robin at Idaho. Yeah, and so Robin has a bunch of those kinds of problems. So yeah, I'm also interested. I'm teaching stats right now, and right now we have overlap at City Tech. They're running an R for statistics seminar among the faculty because they're incorporating R into the next course for fall. So, I mean, I wish we could do it all. I mean, there are only so many hours in the day. I wish we could all talk together. But yes, Agnes, I would love those too. So please, any resources you have, we would love them.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll send you an email.
Okay.
And I know like we've done this at U of C, and all the code we've got for doing it is based on the UBC problems. And I mean, I'm not a statistician by any stretch, but I stole some of that code to do some matrix stuff where basically I know there are problems that use various R functions to generate data sets that have certain properties, that are distributed a certain way.
Right.
And you can then export those to a CSV and pass that to the student, and it would be different for each student.
Okay.
So I know it's doable.
And I was told that the students could actually type R code into the WeBWorK problem. Because one of the problems I have right now is it used to be in R, if you set the random, so if you have an algorithm that has a random component to it, like everybody's going to get a different answer. So you have the students set the seed, so everybody should get the same answer. But starting last year, that seems to be buggy. And so I'm getting students getting different answers with the same random seed. So if they could enter this if they could do their calculation directly through WeBWorK, that presumably could eliminate that bug, or allow me to work around that bug in R. So does anybody know anything about that?
I know, I mean, again, I don't know how well it works, but there is code
Okay.
to do that. I mean, like,
Okay.
I'm just looking at a random problem file now, but there's a set.seed function in R.
Yeah. Right.
And
So
if
that's
you call that from within your WeBWorK problem, it should give the same results every time.
Well, I'm just hoping if everybody's computing off of the same platform, it ought to be the same. But like when they work on their own local machine, we're sometimes getting different answers.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I can possibly put you in touch with the person who writes them at U of C.
That'd be great. I put my information in the chat. I have another meeting at 3, so I'm going to have to bail. But any help along these lines would be greatly appreciated, because I'd really like to develop this for a number of courses.
So you basically want Jupyter functionality in WeBWork.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, so, all right, so my first goal would be students all get different data sets. That would be my first goal. If I can also have them enter small amounts of code to answer the questions, that would be even better. But that, in that sense, I guess it would be like using Jupyter. But
Yeah, and I'm not aware, it might be possible to do that with the Sage Cell integration,
okay.
but I don't know. I'm not aware of being able to type R code into a WeBWorK answer
Okay.
and have
I
it
mean,
evaluated.
if it can pass it through to the server, it's at least conceivable.
I mean, there is this this graphing tool, right? That I learned about in one of these meetings about 3-4 months ago. 3D plotter or something. I forget what it's called. Somebody tell me.
There's
CalcPlot 3D. Yeah, that's from
CalcPlot
Monica.
3D.
Mhm.
Well, unfortunately, it's lovely because what you do is you generate, you put a link in there, you generate a graph, and the student can submit a link which contains within it all the commands that, and literally the graph gets regenerated when the marker, for example, sees that. So that's terrific. The only downside there is that that tool, that particular tool, for me, doesn't have any ability to pass data back and forth. You have to pass an expression. So it's a visualization tool for formulas, specifically not for any sort of say, so like Stephen was saying, we couldn't use something like that in the lab. We could not run a lab. So in the same way, maybe I don't know this, but wouldn't that be something you're looking for? You're looking for a server that provides understanding of our calls,
Yeah.
and returns back rendered whatever picture.
Yeah, picture or